that we could not do then. And I'm speaking for myself. Hey. Yes, sir.
Ben, talk about the 10th Amendment a little bit and how somehow our current administrations, or the past many.
Yeah, it's not just the current administration. They may be more aggressive about it, but governments tend to accumulate power. The presidents accumulate power. The Congresses accumulate power. The worst danger, and Tom Jefferson wrote about this, is when courts accumulate power. Because there's no recourse to when the Supreme Court says this law is unconstitutional. There's nowhere above it that you can go. And no member of the court has ever been impeached for making an exceptionally stupid decision. Of course, if stupidity were the grounds, we'd be hard put to replace all the congressmen and senators and presidents and Supreme Court justices and a few 100,000 bureaucrats that would be under the gun. Wait a minute, your original question was about?
10th Amendment.
Oh, the 10th Amendment.
And then the Congress Clause.
Yeah, the 10th Amendment says that all power is not given to the federal government by the Constitution are reserved to the people of the states respectively. That was an important clause. And the Constitution, or excuse me, amendment, and the Constitution would not have passed had that not been part of the Bill of Rights. The history of the Bill of Rights is rather interesting. We rejected in the Constitutional Convention the idea that there should be a Bill of Rights, and we knew the concept because several states had them. But we decided that to enumerate certain rights would be to suggest that any rights that someone thought about which were not enumerated, would not exist, would not be respected or protected. So therefore we made the decision in Philadelphia not to have a Bill of Rights. As the Constitution went around for ratification, several states demanded a Bill of Rights, and North Carolina was most aggressive in that. North Carolina held their ratification convention, and they said, we won't ratify until you have a Bill of Rights, and we're going home. And they went home. And not until, that's why there were only 11 states in the Union when George Washington was elected the first president. North Carolina was not in because of what their ratifying convention had done. And Rhode Island was not in because they never sent anyone to Philadelphia. They never held a ratifying convention. However, there were more than 200 suggestions that came from these state ratifying conventions saying we want amendments on the following subjects. And one that was very popular was something akin to the 10th Amendment, because our intent was to give certain powers to the federal government, and we stated what those powers were, and no more. And the 10th Amendment simply underlined that. And you're absolutely right that it has been jumped up and down with hobnail boots by a number of administrations, not just the current one. The current one seems to start from higher and jump more strongly on the 10th Amendment. But it really is important. Now, part of the failure of the federal government came when we passed the amendment to make members of the United States Senate elected by popular vote rather than by selection of the legislatures. There used to be a practice when the legislatures would send the senators that they would send what's called resolutions of instruction to the senator from their state, or senators from their state, saying, we, the legislature of state X, want the answer to this particular legal question about the passage of a law to be X. And members of the Senate would actually resign if they wanted the answer to be Y rather than X. Can you imagine that? A member of the Senate resigning because the people in the state disagreed with him. Now, when they've been there a while, they don't give the least particle of a tinker's dam. That's D-A-M. You know what a tinker's dam is? What the people in their state say, as long as the money continues to flow in their coffers for them to run the advertising to be reelected. So it was that amendment which cut off at the knees the intended ability of the states to be holding a leash on the federal government when it, in the opinion of the states, got out of hand. And you see states now passing resolutions about the 10th Amendment. There's going to be an explosion on this point. The question is, what is it going to be and when is it going to occur? Now, some of them are talking about, well, if the federal government passes a law which we consider unconstitutional, we won't abide by it. Hello, has anybody read recently the history of the late unpleasantness? As my grandmother from Birmingham, Alabama, referred to the war between the states. It was fought on the issue of nullification doctrine. And the ultimate way to lose an argument is not to be debated into the ground in a forum. It is to have people with guns defeat you in a war. Logic no longer matters. You lost the war. We lost the war, depending on which, I'm from Philadelphia, but it was an interesting war. Yes, sir.
Would you talk maybe a moment about the preamble?
Yes, you've been seeing some stuff where there are so many constitutional illiterates that hold positions of power that there's so many you can't shake a stick out. We said in the Federalist, and we meant it from Philadelphia, that the preamble is not part of the law of the Constitution. It is the social intentions we had when we sat down, and the most important words are we the people, because we created a government that rested on popular consent, which now is allegedly commonplace, but there are elected dictators these days around the world. It doesn't matter how somebody got into office, by cheating an election or shooting a few people. Either way, if they operate as a dictator when they get in, the concept of democratic controls on the executive are gone. But those were our social intentions of why we wrote this law. And the Supreme Court has long since recognized that the preamble to a law, have you ever read the preambles to laws? They'll say a law to authorize a mother to march on airplane blue. I don't care what it might be. They put some really highfalutin subject matter in there. And they'll start off with a preamble saying that this is an awful terrible situation, but they have written this law that's the best thing since sliced bread. And here it is to solve this problem, which may or may not be a real problem for starters, and it may or may not be a real solution. But they write preambles. The preamble is not part of the law of the Constitution. And you notice, I saw a hearing when Gettner, Secretary of the Treasury, was asked by Michelle Bachmann, member of Congress, please tell me the authority, where is the authority in the Constitution that allows you, or allows the government, to conduct this bailout of assorted institutions that have gotten themselves in a whole lot of trouble by being stupid for a long time. And it looked like it was a deer caught in headlights. And then he said, well, Congress authorized it. And she said, well, that doesn't mean the Constitution gives the power to Congress to do that. Would you please cite me to the place in the Constitution? And the man was positively bewildered. He is so stupid on the subject of constitutional law, however bright he may be in other areas, so stupid on this one subject, that he did not even comprehend the question. He was confused by the question. And yet all of us in Philadelphia knew that the whole point was to give certain powers to the federal government, certain powers to the state, guarantee that certain things that belong to the people as individuals would remain in their hands forever. End of discussion. That's why we wrote the document. That's why anybody who means it writes a constitution like that. I've studied a lot of constitutions.